morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez adjusted her uniform one final time before stepping into the administrative building. At 26, she had already served 4 years in the army, but today felt different. Today, she was going to make a request that could change everything. The hallways buzzed with the usual morning activity. Officers rushing to meetings, soldiers heading to training exercises, and clerks shuffling papers between departments. Sarah's boots echoed against the polished floor as she made her way to the personnel office, her heart pounding with each step. "Next," called Sergeant Williams from behind the desk, barely looking up from his computer screen. His tone suggested he had already processed dozens of routine requests that morning and expected nothing different from the young woman approaching his desk. Sarah straightened her shoulders and placed her carefully prepared paperwork on the counter. "Sergeant, I'd like to submit a request for transfer to the Special Operations Division." The typing stopped. Sergeant Williams slowly raised his eyes from the screen, a smirk already forming on his lips. Around the office, conversations quieted as other personnel turned to listen. Sarah felt the weight of their stares but kept her expression steady. "Special Ops?" Williams repeated, loud enough for the entire office to hear. "You do realize what you're asking for, don't you?" He picked up her file, flipping through pages with exaggerated slowness. "It says here you're currently assigned to communications. That's quite a leap you're trying to make." Sarah had prepared for this reaction. She knew her request would seem ambitious to those who only saw her current assignment. "Yes, Sergeant. I understand the requirements, and I believe I meet the qualifications." A laugh erupted from somewhere behind her. Sarah didn't turn around, but she could feel her cheeks burning. Williams leaned back in his chair, making no effort to hide his amusement. "Listen, Martinez," he said, using her last name like it was something distasteful. "Special operations isn't for everyone. It requires a certain type of person. Someone with experience, strength, mental toughness. You're asking to go from pushing papers and operating radios to one of the most elite units in the military." The room had grown completely silent now. Sarah could sense the other soldiers and staff members watching the scene unfold like it was entertainment. Some were trying to hide grins. Others were openly staring with curiosity and amusement. "I've been training extensively in my off-duty hours," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm despite the humiliation she felt rising in her chest. "My physical fitness scores have consistently improved, and I've completed additional courses in tactical operations and advanced weaponry." "Training in your spare time?" Williams scoffed. "That's cute. Do you have any idea what these guys go through? We're talking about soldiers who've been through hell and back, who've proven themselves in combat situations you can't even imagine from your comfortable desk job." Another soldier at a nearby desk joined in. "Hey, Martinez, maybe you should start with something more realistic. How about requesting a transfer to the mess hall? At least then you'd be closer to your skill level." Laughter rippled through the office. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she refused to back down. She had expected resistance, even mockery, but experiencing it firsthand was more painful than she had anticipated. "I understand your skepticism," she said, addressing Williams directly while ignoring the comments from the peanut gallery.
"But I'm not asking for special treatment."
"I'm asking for the opportunity to prove myself through the standard selection process." Williams shook his head, still wearing that condescending smile. "The standard selection process? Do you know what that involves? It's not just about being able to do a few extra push-ups or hitting targets at the shooting range. We're talking about psychological evaluations, extreme physical challenges, survival training in conditions that would break most people." He leaned forward, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "And even if by some miracle you made it through selection, what then? You'd be working with soldiers who've earned their place through blood, sweat, and years of dedicated service. They don't have time to babysit someone who thinks a few weekend training sessions qualify them for the big leagues." Sarah felt her resolve wavering for just a moment. The doubt that she had pushed down for months began to creep back into her mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was being naive, thinking she could make such a dramatic career change. But then she remembered why she was here. She thought about the dreams that had kept her awake at night, the vision of herself as something more than what others expected. She thought about her father, who had served in special operations decades ago, and the stories he had told her about pushing beyond limitations that others imposed. "I appreciate your concerns," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to process my request according to military protocol." William sat back, clearly annoyed that she wasn't backing down as expected. He glanced around the room, perhaps looking for support from his colleagues, but found only curious faces waiting to see how this confrontation would end. "Fine," he said, his tone sharp with irritation. "I'll process your request, but don't say I didn't warn you when you wash out in the first week. Hell, you'll be lucky if they don't laugh you out of the room during the initial interview." He snatched the paperwork from the counter and began typing aggressively on his keyboard. "You'll need to complete additional forms, undergo a preliminary physical and psychological evaluation, and provide references from your current commanding officers. The whole process could take weeks or months, assuming they even consider your application seriously."
That's fine, Sarah replied.
"I'm prepared to wait and to complete whatever requirements are necessary." As Williams continued processing her request, murmurs began circulating around the office again. Sarah heard fragments of conversations, speculation about her chances, betting on how quickly she would give up, and general amusement at what they saw as a foolish ambition. "You know," said the soldier who had made the mess hall comment earlier, "I've got to admire the confidence even if it is completely misplaced. It takes guts to walk in here and ask for something so far out of your league." Sarah turned to face him. "What makes you so certain it's out of my league?" The question caught him off guard. He hesitated for a moment before responding. "Come on, Martinez, look around. How many women do you see in special operations? There's a reason for that. It's not about being politically correct or fair. It's about capability and reality. Maybe," Sarah said quietly, "or maybe it's about opportunities and assumptions." Williams finished typing and printed out several forms. "Here," he said, sliding the papers across the counter with obvious reluctance. "Complete these and return them by Friday. Don't expect any special accommodations or hand-holding through the process." Sarah gathered the documents, taking a moment to scan the requirements: physical fitness standards, psychological evaluations, background checks, recommendation letters. It was an intimidating list, but nothing she hadn't expected. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said professionally. "I'll have everything completed and submitted on time." As she turned to leave, Williams called out one final comment that was clearly intended for the entire office to hear. "Hey, Martinez, when you change your mind about this whole special ops fantasy, remember that your current position is still available." We'll try not to say "I told you so" too loudly. More laughter followed her as she walked toward the exit, but Sarah kept her head high and her pace steady. She had survived the first hurdle, submitting her request despite the mockery and discouragement. Now came the real work. Outside the administrative building, Sarah found a quiet bench and sat down to review the forms Williams had given her. The requirements were indeed extensive, but as she read through each section, she felt her determination growing stronger rather than weaker. The physical fitness standards were challenging but achievable. She had been training for months, pushing her body beyond the standard requirements for her current position. Her running times had improved dramatically. Her strength had increased significantly, and her endurance was better than it had ever been. The psychological evaluation requirement didn't concern her either. Sarah had always been mentally tough, able to handle stress and pressure without breaking down. She had proven this during several difficult situations in her current role, though she doubted anyone in the personnel office knew or cared about those experiences. What worried her most were the recommendation letters. She needed endorsements from her commanding officers, and she wasn't sure how they would react to her request. Would they support her ambition, or would they see it as a betrayal of her current duties? Her immediate supervisor, Lieutenant Colonel Anderson, had always been fair with her, but he was also practical and traditional in his thinking. He might see her request as unrealistic or even disrespectful to the soldiers who had already earned their place in special operations. Sarah spent the rest of the morning completing the initial paperwork and planning her approach to the recommendation letters. She decided to be completely honest about her intentions and her preparation, hoping that her dedication and sincerity would overcome any initial skepticism. That afternoon, she requested a meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Anderson. His office was small but organized, with commendations and unit photos covering one wall and operational maps spread across his desk. "Sir, I wanted to discuss a career decision I'm considering," Sarah began, choosing her words carefully. Anderson looked up from his paperwork, giving her his full attention. "What kind of career decision, Martinez?" "I've submitted a request for transfer to special operations, sir." Anderson's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. "That's quite an ambitious move. What's prompted this decision?" Sarah had rehearsed this conversation multiple times, but actually having it felt different than she had expected. Anderson wasn't mocking her like Williams had. but she could sense his surprise and perhaps concern. "I've been training extensively in my personal time, sir. I believe I had the physical and mental capabilities to succeed in that environment, and I'd like the opportunity to prove it." Anderson leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Sarah, you're a good soldier. You do your job well, you're reliable, and your current unit depends on you. Why risk all of that for something that might not work out?" "Because I believe I can contribute more, sir. I believe I can serve at a higher level if given the chance." They talked for nearly an hour. Anderson asked about her training, her motivation, and her understanding of what special operations entailed. To Sarah's relief, he didn't dismiss her request outright, but she could tell he had reservations. "I'll need to think about this," he said finally. "If you're serious about pursuing this path, you'll need my recommendation, and I want to make sure I'm giving you honest advice about your chances." "I understand, sir. I appreciate you taking the time to consider it." As Sarah left Anderson's office, she felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. The day had brought both humiliation and possibility. The mockery in the personnel office had stung, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She was tired of being underestimated, tired of being seen as someone who should be satisfied with limitations others placed on her. That evening, Sarah returned to the base gym for her regular training session. As she went through her workout routine, push-ups, pull-ups, running, weight training, she thought about the long road ahead. The application process was just the beginning. Even if she were accepted into the selection program, she would face months of intense physical and mental challenges designed to eliminate all but the most capable candidates. But for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was moving towards something that truly mattered to her. Whether she succeeded or failed, at least she would know she had tried to become everything she believed she could be. The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork completion and training intensification. Sarah threw herself into preparation with renewed focus, knowing that every aspect of her application would be scrutinized. She completed the required forms with meticulous attention to detail, researched the selection process thoroughly, and continued pushing her physical limits. Word of her special operations request began spreading beyond the personnel office. Some colleagues expressed surprise, others offered encouragement, and a few continued to question her judgment. But Sarah found that she cared less about their opinions with each passing day. This decision was about her future, not their expectations. 3 weeks later, Sarah received the call that would change everything. She was cleaning her rifle after morning training when her phone rang, displaying an unknown number from the base's main switchboard. "Martinez, this is Colonel Harrison from Special Operations Command." The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. "Your application has been reviewed, and you've been selected for the preliminary evaluation phase. Report to Building 47 at 0800 tomorrow morning. Bring your PT gear and be prepared for a full day of assessments." Sarah's heart nearly stopped. "Yes, sir." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet, soldier. This is just the beginning." The line went dead, and Sarah stared at her phone in disbelief. After weeks of waiting and wondering, she had made it to the first stage. The preliminary evaluation was notoriously difficult. Most candidates were eliminated before they ever reached the actual selection course. That evening, Sarah could barely eat dinner. She double-checked her gear, ran through mental exercises her father had taught her years ago, and tried to get enough sleep despite her racing thoughts. Tomorrow would determine whether her dream had any chance of becoming reality. At 0755 hours, Sarah stood outside Building 47 with 12 other candidates. She recognized a few faces from around the base, but most were strangers. Soldiers from other units who had also decided to test their limits. She was the only woman in the group. The building looked ordinary from the outside, but Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving on a military base. As they waited, the other candidates sized each other up with quick glances and subtle assessments. The tension was palpable. Precisely at 0800, the door opened, and a man stepped out who immediately commanded attention. Colonel Harrison was probably in his late 40s, with graying hair, piercing blue eyes, and the kind of presence that suggested he had seen and survived things most people couldn't imagine. His uniform was perfectly pressed, and Sarah noticed something on his collar that made her breath catch, a small black pin in the shape of a talon. "Gentlemen," Harrison's voice carried easily across the group, "and lady," he added with a slight nod towards Sarah, "welcome to what will either be the beginning of the most challenging chapter of your military careers or the end of a fantasy that never should have existed." Several candidates shifted uncomfortably, but Sarah kept her attention focused on the colonel. "Some of you are here because you think you're tough. Some because you're bored with your current assignments. Some because you want the prestige or the challenge. None of those are good enough reasons, and most of you will discover that before the day is over. Harrison began walking slowly along the line of candidates, making eye contact with each one. When he reached Sarah, his gaze lingered for a moment longer than with the others, but his expression remained unreadable. The preliminary evaluation consists of 4 phases, he continued. Physical assessment, psychological evaluation, tactical problem solving, and stress testing. Each phase is designed to identify specific qualities we require in special operations personnel. You will be evaluated not just on your performance, but on how you handle failure, pressure, and unexpected challenges. He paused at the end of the line and turned back to face the group. Before we begin, I want to make something clear. This is not about fairness. This is not about giving everyone an equal chance. This is about identifying individuals who can perform at the highest levels under the worst possible conditions. If you're looking for encouragement or hand-holding, you're in the wrong place. The first phase began immediately. The physical assessment was unlike anything Sarah had experienced during her regular fitness evaluations. It started with standard exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, but the standards were significantly higher than normal requirements, and the pace was relentless. 43, 44, 45, called the evaluator as Sarah continued her push-ups. Her arms were burning, but she pushed through the pain, focusing on maintaining proper form. Around her, she could hear other candidates struggling, some already falling behind. When the push-up segment finally ended, they immediately moved to pull-ups. Sarah had always been proud of her ability to complete more pull-ups than most of her male colleagues, but this test pushed her to her absolute limit. As she hung from the bar, muscles screaming in protest, she caught a glimpse of Colonel Harrison watching from the sidelines, his expression giving away nothing. The running portion was brutal. Instead of a simple timed run, the candidates were required to complete an obstacle course that included rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling under barriers, and sprinting between stations. The course was designed to test not just speed and endurance, but coordination, problem-solving ability, and mental toughness when physical exhaustion set in. By the time Sarah completed the obstacle course, 3 candidates had already been eliminated. They sat on benches to the side, looking dejected and exhausted. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for them, but she couldn't afford to dwell on their disappointment. She still had 3 more phases to survive. The psychological evaluation took place in a small, windowless room with fluorescent lighting that seemed designed to be uncomfortable. Rebecca Chen, the staff psychologist, was a petite woman with an unexpectedly intense presence. Tell me about a time when you failed at something important. Dr. Chen began without preamble. Sarah had expected this type of question, but the directness of it still caught her off guard. She thought carefully before responding, knowing that her answer would reveal more about her character than she might intend. Last year, I was leading a communications team during a training exercise, she began. We were responsible for maintaining contact between 3 different units operating in a simulated combat scenario. I made a decision to relocate our equipment to get better signal coverage, but I didn't properly account for the time it would take to re-establish connections. Dr. Chen made notes but didn't interrupt. As a result, we lost contact with one of the units for nearly 20 minutes during a critical phase of the exercise. The exercise commanders had to call a halt until communications could be restored. My decision to improve our position actually compromised the entire operation. How did you handle the aftermath? I took full responsibility for the failure. I analyzed what went wrong, identified the specific mistakes in my decision-making process, and developed new protocols to prevent similar problems in future operations. I also personally apologized to the unit commanders whose mission was compromised. Dr. Chen continued asking probing questions for nearly an hour. She explored Sarah's motivation, her response to stress, her ability to work in team environments, and her understanding of the psychological demands of special operations work. Some questions were straightforward. Others were designed to reveal unconscious biases or hidden weaknesses. When the psychological evaluation ended, Sarah felt mentally drained. The questions had forced her to examine aspects of her personality and motivation that she rarely considered consciously. She hoped her answers had demonstrated the kind of self-awareness and mental toughness the evaluators were seeking. The tactical problem-solving phase presented scenarios that required quick thinking under pressure. Candidates were given limited information about hypothetical situations and asked to develop solutions within strict time constraints. The scenarios ranged from hostage rescue operations to intelligence-gathering missions, each designed to test different aspects of tactical reasoning. "You have 5 minutes to study this layout," announced Captain Rodriguez, handing Sarah a detailed floor plan of a building. "Then you'll have 10 minutes to explain how you would approach a situation where hostages are being held on the second floor. Hostile forces are unknown in number and location, and civilian evacuation routes are limited." Sarah studied the floor plan intensively, noting entry and exit points, potential cover positions, sight lines, and structural features that could impact tactical decisions. When her study time expired, she outlined a methodical approach that prioritized intelligence gathering, minimized risk to hostages, and provided multiple contingency options. "What if the intelligence you gathered proved to be incorrect?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Then I would need to adapt the plan in real time while maintaining the primary objectives of hostage safety and mission success," Sarah replied. "Flexibility and quick decision-making are essential when initial assumptions prove wrong." The questioning continued, with Rodriguez presenting complications and unexpected developments that required Sarah to modify her approach. She found herself drawing on knowledge from her communications background, her training experiences, and tactical principles she had studied independently. By late afternoon, only 7 candidates remained. The stress testing phase was the final hurdle, and Sarah could see the exhaustion in everyone's faces. They had been pushed physically, mentally, and emotionally for nearly 8 hours, and the day wasn't over yet. The stress testing combined elements from all the previous phases, while adding psychological pressure, time constraints, and deliberate frustration. Candidates were required to perform complex tasks while evaluators created distractions, provided conflicting instructions, and introduced unexpected complications. "Martinez, you're team leader for this exercise," announced Colonel Harrison. "Your team needs to navigate this course, solve these puzzle elements, and reach the extraction point within 30 minutes. However, 2 of your team members are now injured and can only use 1 arm each." Sarah looked at her assigned team. 4 other candidates, 2 of whom were now required to simulate arm injuries. The course ahead of them was complicated, requiring both individual skills and team coordination. "Questions?" Harrison asked. "No, sir," Sarah replied, though her mind was racing with concerns about timing, logistics, and the capabilities of her temporarily disabled team members. "Begin!" What followed was controlled chaos. Sarah found herself making rapid decisions about task assignments, route selection, and problem-solving approaches while her team struggled with the physical and mental challenges of the course. The evaluators continually introduced new complications, equipment failures, changed objectives, additional time pressure. "Martinez!" Harrison's voice cut through the noise. "Your extraction helicopter has been delayed. You now have hostile forces approaching from the north. What's your decision?" Sarah assessed their current position, the capabilities of her team, and the available options. They were 2/3 of the way through the course, but the simulated approaching enemies would reach them before they could complete their planned route. "We're changing the objective," she announced to her team. "Instead of reaching the original extraction point, we're going to establish a defensive position at the high ground to the east and call for backup." "That's not the mission, Martinez," called one of the evaluators. "The mission is to ensure team survival and mission completion," Sarah replied without hesitation. "If the original plan is no longer viable, we adapt to maintain those priorities." Harrison nodded slightly, the first sign of approval Sarah had seen from him all day. The stress testing continued for another hour, with scenarios that pushed every candidate to their breaking point. Sarah watched 2 more soldiers eliminate themselves by giving up when the pressure became overwhelming. She felt her own resolve wavering at times, but each time doubt crept in. She reminded herself why she was there. When the evaluation finally ended, the 5 remaining candidates stood in a line, exhausted and uncertain. Colonel Harrison addressed them one final time. "You've completed the preliminary evaluation. That doesn't mean you've passed. It means you've survived the first cut. Your performances will be reviewed, and you'll be notified within 1 week whether you've been selected for the full Special Operations Selection course." As the candidates dispersed, Sarah felt a mixture of accomplishment and anxiety. She had made it through the day, but she had no idea how her performance compared to the standards Harrison was applying. All she could do now was wait and hope that her efforts had been enough to earn her a chance at the real selection process. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on the day's challenges. The physical demands had been intense but manageable. The psychological and tactical evaluations had pushed her to think in new ways and demonstrate capabilities she had been developing for months. The stress testing had revealed aspects of her leadership abilities and decision-making process that she hadn't fully understood about herself. But more than anything, the day had shown her that her dream of joining special operations was achievable. Difficult, certainly, but not impossible. She had held her own among candidates who had initially seemed more qualified or experienced. She had demonstrated the kind of mental toughness and adaptability that Harrison and his team were seeking. That evening, Sarah called her father to tell him about the evaluation. He listened quietly as she described the day's events, occasionally asking questions about specific challenges or her responses to them. "I'm proud of you," he said when she finished. "Regardless of what happens next, you've already accomplished something significant by making it this far. Do you think I have a real chance?" Sarah asked. Her father was quiet for a moment before responding. "Sarah, I spent 15 years in special operations. I know what these people are looking for, and from what you've told me, you demonstrated exactly the kind of qualities they value most: intelligence, adaptability, leadership under pressure, and the mental toughness to keep going when everything seems impossible. But the full selection course is unlike anything you've experienced so far. The preliminary evaluation was designed to test your basic capabilities. Selection is designed to break you down completely and see what remains. It's going to challenge everything you think you know about your own limits." Sarah understood what he was saying, but instead of discouraging her, his words only strengthened her determination. She had come too far to back down now, regardless of how difficult the path ahead might be. 5 days later, Sarah was reviewing communication protocols at her desk when Lieutenant Colonel Anderson appeared beside her cubicle, holding an official-looking envelope. "This came for you through special delivery," he said, his expression unreadable. "Whatever it says, I want you to know that I submitted a strong recommendation for you. You've earned the right to pursue this opportunity." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she took the envelope. The return address showed Special Operations Command, and the weight of the paper suggested this was more than a simple rejection letter. Taking a deep breath, she carefully opened the seal. "Congratulations," the letter began. "You have been selected to participate in the Special Operations Selection Course beginning Monday, March 15th. Report to Training Facility Charlie at 0500 hours with the attached equipment list." Sarah read the entire letter twice before the reality sank in. She had made it. Against all odds, despite the mockery and skepticism she had faced, she was going to get her chance to prove herself at the highest level. The selection course was everything her father had warned her it would be, and more. For 6 weeks, Sarah and 19 other candidates were pushed beyond every limit they thought they possessed. The physical challenges were brutal. Long-distance marches with heavy packs, obstacle courses completed while sleep-deprived, survival exercises in harsh conditions with minimal equipment. But the mental challenges were even more demanding. Sleep deprivation, constant pressure, deliberately confusing instructions, and scenarios designed to create doubt and frustration. Sarah watched capable soldiers break down and quit, unable to handle the psychological strain. The instructors were relentless but never unfair. They pushed every candidate to their absolute breaking point, but they also provided subtle guidance to those who showed the potential to succeed. Sarah began to understand that the course wasn't just about weeding out the weak, it was about forging the strong into something extraordinary. 3 weeks into the course, during a particularly challenging navigation exercise in rough terrain, Sarah found herself paired with Marcus Thompson, a veteran soldier who had initially been skeptical of her presence in the program. "Martinez," he said as they consulted their map during a brief rest stop, "I owe you an apology. When I first saw you here, I figured you were some kind of diversity quota candidate who wouldn't last a week." Sarah looked up from the compass she was checking. "What changed your mind?" Marcus gestured toward the trail they had just completed. A grueling 12-mile march through mountainous terrain while carrying 60-pound packs. "You've been keeping pace with guys who outweigh you by 50 pounds. You haven't complained once, haven't asked for special consideration. And yesterday when Johnson twisted his ankle, you carried part of his gear without being asked." He paused, shaking his head. "I've been in the regular army for 8 years, and I've never seen that kind of heart from anyone, male or female. You belong here." Sarah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the physical exertion, Earning the respect of her fellow candidates meant more to her than any official recognition could. The final week of selection was known as the Crucible, a continuous exercise that combined all the skills and mental toughness developed over the previous 5 weeks. Candidates operated with minimal sleep, constant pressure, and scenarios that changed without warning. On the last day of the Crucible, Sarah found herself leading a team tasked with a complex rescue scenario. They had been awake for over 36 hours, had covered more than 40 miles on foot, and were operating with equipment that had been deliberately sabotaged to test their problem-solving abilities. "Martinez, your communication equipment has failed," announced Colonel Harrison, who had been observing the exercise. "You cannot contact headquarters or coordinate with other teams. Your team has located the hostages, but you now have intelligence indicating that hostile forces are converging on your position from multiple directions." Sarah's exhausted mind raced through the tactical situation. Every instinct told her to wait for backup or try to re-establish communications, but the scenario was designed to force immediate decision-making with incomplete information. "We're going in now," she announced to her team. "Thompson, you and Williams create a distraction at the north entrance. Peterson and I will breach from the south. If we wait for the hostiles to arrive, we lose the advantage of surprise and put the hostages at greater risk." It was a high-risk decision, but Sarah had learned that special operations often required choosing between dangerous options rather than waiting for safe ones. Her team executed the plan flawlessly, securing the simulated hostages and establishing a defensible position before the opposing forces could interfere. When the exercise ended, Colonel Harrison addressed the exhausted candidates. 11 of you started the Crucible 6 days ago. 7 of you are still here. That tells you something about the standards we maintain and the caliber of personnel we're seeking." Sarah looked around at her fellow survivors. They were a diverse group in terms of background and experience, but they all shared something she could see in their eyes: an unshakable determination and a willingness to push beyond conventional limits. "You'll have 48 hours to recover before final evaluations begin," Harrison continued. "Use that time wisely. Rest, eat, and prepare for the most comprehensive assessment of your capabilities you've ever experienced." The final evaluations were individual rather than team-based. Each candidate underwent intensive interviews, practical examinations, and scenario-based tests designed to reveal their suitability for different types of special operations missions. Sarah's interview with the selection board was conducted by 3 officers she had never met before. The questioning was thorough and sometimes uncomfortable, exploring not just her capabilities, but her motivation, her understanding of the responsibilities she was seeking, and her ability to handle the ethical complexities of special operations work. "Martinez," said General Patricia Hayes, the senior officer on the board, "you've performed exceptionally well throughout this selection process, but I want you to understand what you're asking to join. Special operations personnel face situations that most people cannot imagine. They make decisions that have life and death consequences, sometimes with incomplete information, and always under extreme pressure." Sarah nodded. "I understand, ma'am. I believe I'm prepared for those responsibilities." "What makes you believe that?" asked Colonel James Mitchell, the second board member. Sarah had thought about this question throughout the selection process. "Because I've discovered that I perform better under pressure rather than worse. The more challenging the situation becomes, the clearer my thinking gets and the more focused I become. I've also learned that I can lead others effectively in crisis situations and that I can make difficult decisions when necessary." "The third board member, Colonel David Park," leaned forward. "Give me a specific example from the selection course that demonstrates those qualities." Sarah described the rescue scenario from the Crucible, explaining her decision-making process and the factors that had influenced her tactical choices. The board members asked follow-up questions that revealed they had detailed knowledge of every aspect of her performance. After 2 hours of intensive questioning, General Hayes dismissed Sarah with the standard phrase, "You'll be notified of our decision within 72 hours. Those 3 days were among the longest of Sarah's life. She tried to stay busy with routine duties, but her mind constantly returned to the selection process and her performance during the final evaluations. She had given everything she had, but she still didn't know if it had been enough. On Thursday afternoon, Sarah was called to report to Colonel Harrison's office immediately. As she walked through the corridors, she tried to prepare herself for either outcome. If she had been selected, it would be the beginning of a new chapter in her military career. If she had failed, she would need to find a way to move forward with dignity and purpose. Harrison's office was different from how she remembered it from her first day of preliminary evaluation. The walls were covered with photos and commendations that told the story of a distinguished career in special operations. Behind his desk, Sarah noticed a display case containing various military decorations, including several she recognized as being awarded only for the most exceptional service. "Martinez," Harrison began. "Please have a seat." Sarah sat down, maintaining her composure despite her racing heart. "I want to talk to you about something that happened during your final evaluation," Harrison continued. "Something that impressed the selection board more than you might realize." He opened a folder on his desk and pulled out what appeared to be a mission report. "During the Crucible, when you made the decision to proceed with the hostage rescue despite communication failures and approaching hostile forces, you demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment and courage we look for in special operations personnel. But it was something else about that decision that caught our attention." Harrison looked up from the report. "You chose the higher risk option not because you were reckless, but because you correctly assessed that waiting would put the hostages in greater danger. That kind of selfless decision-making under extreme pressure is rare." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond, so she remained silent. "There's something else," Harrison said, reaching into his desk drawer. "Something I think you should know about your father." He pulled out a small black pin in the shape of a Talon, identical to the one Sarah had noticed on his collar during that first day of evaluation. "Your father earned this during Operation Desert Storm," Harrison said, holding up the pin. "It's awarded only to special operations personnel who demonstrate extraordinary courage and effectiveness in combat situations. There are fewer than 200 people currently authorized to wear this insignia." Sarah's eyes widened. Her father had never told her about any special decorations or recognition for his service. She had known he was in special operations, but he had always been modest about his military achievements. "Your father was my team leader during 3 separate missions in 1991, Harrison continued. "He saved my life twice and the lives of countless others through his leadership and tactical brilliance. When I saw your name on the application list, I wondered if you might be related to him." Sarah found her voice. "He never told me about any special recognition, sir." "That doesn't surprise me. The men and women who earn the Black Talon are typically the ones who are most humble about their achievements." Harrison smiled slightly. I want you to understand that your selection for this program had nothing to do with your father's service. You earned your place here through your own capabilities and performance." He stood up and walked around his desk. "Martinez, congratulations. You have successfully completed Special Operations Selection. You'll begin advanced training in 2 weeks, and upon completion, you'll be assigned to an operational unit." Sarah felt a surge of emotion that she struggled to control. After months of preparation, weeks of the most challenging experiences of her life, and constant doubt about whether she was capable enough, she had achieved her goal. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say. "There's one more thing," Harrison said, returning to his seat. "I spoke with your father yesterday to inform him of your selection. He wanted me to tell you that he's proud of you and that you've accomplished something he never thought possible when he was starting his career." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. The validation from her father meant more than any official recognition could. "He also wanted me to give you this," Harrison said, sliding the black Talon pin across his desk. This was his. "He said that if you're going to be carrying on the family tradition, you should understand the weight of that responsibility." Sarah picked up the small pin, feeling its surprising weight. It looked simple, almost ordinary, but she knew it represented something extraordinary. "Sir, I don't know if I've earned the right to wear this." "You haven't," Harrison said simply. "But someday you might. Your father wanted you to have it as a reminder of what you're working toward and what's expected of personnel who wear that insignia." As Sarah prepared to leave Harrison's office, she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The mockery in the personnel office seemed like a distant memory, replaced by the knowledge that she had proven herself capable of meeting the highest standards in military service. "One final thing, Martinez," Harrison said as she reached the door. "That sergeant in the personnel office who gave you such a hard time about your initial application, I had a conversation with him about treating all applicants with professional courtesy, regardless of his personal opinions about their chances of success." Sarah smiled. "Thank you, sir, but that's not necessary. His skepticism helped motivate me to work harder." "Perhaps," Harrison replied. "But motivation should come from within, not from others' doubts about your capabilities." Walking back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on everything that had happened since that difficult morning when she had first submitted her application. The path had been more challenging than she had anticipated, but it had also revealed strengths and capabilities she hadn't known she possessed. Her phone rang as she entered her room. The caller ID showed her father's number. "Congratulations," he said simply when she answered. "Thank you. Colonel Harrison told me about the PIN, about your service record. I never mentioned it because I wanted you to find your own path, not feel obligated to follow mine. But I'm proud that you chose to pursue excellence in your own way." They talked for an hour about the selection process, the challenges ahead, and what it meant to serve in special operations. For the first time, her father shared stories about his own experiences that he had never told her before. "The Black Talon isn't just a decoration," he explained. "It represents a commitment to a standard of service that goes beyond personal achievement. When you wear that insignia, you're representing every person who has earned it before you." Sarah looked down at the pin he had given her. "I hope I'll be worthy of it someday." "You will be," her father said confidently. "You've already proven that you have the heart and the mind for this kind of service. The rest is just training and experience." That evening, Sarah sat at her desk and wrote in her journal about the day's events. She wanted to remember every detail of this moment, not just the achievement, but the feelings and thoughts that had brought her to this point. 6 months ago, she had been a communications specialist with a dream that seemed impossible to most people around her. Today, she was a member of one of the most elite organizations in the military, preparing for advanced training that would prepare her for missions she could barely imagine. The journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. But Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had already proven to herself and others that she was capable of rising to meet them. The mockery and doubts that had initially stung so deeply had become fuel for a determination that had carried her beyond what even she had believed possible. As she prepared for bed, Sarah placed the Black Talon pin on her nightstand where she could see it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to prove herself. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel proud of how far she had come, and excited about how much further she could go.